All right, we'll get started back. That was really enjoyed Dale's presentation. Next up, we have Kris Verett. I've known the Verett family for many years, and Kris is one of the most progressive thinking people I know. I have such admiration for what he's doing on his farm. He thinks outside the box. He's not afraid to try things. At our last one, he had an excellent presentation. I'm really looking forward to his presentation today, so I'll turn it over to Kris Verett.
Can everybody hear me? Thank you, Barry. Today, we're going to be visiting about my experience with 80-inch cotton and covers of all kind, multi-species covers in a no-till system. As Barry said, I farm in Rawls, Texas, right east of Lubbock in Crosby County. I farm with my dad, my uncle up there. In that picture, as you can see, farm about 4,000 acres, and primarily cotton is our main crop. The others kind of just fit to support the cotton crop, but we also farm a little bit of corn, grain, sorghum, and the multi-species covers, as I said, to support the cotton crop. And trying to work on integrating some cows and some livestock. And until I heard Kelly Kettner's presentation at No Till on the Plains, I never would have thought I'd have sheep up there either. But Kelly had a really good talk about his journey that he took and how he got to farming sheep that I thought was very interesting, and never thought that, number one, I didn't know anything about sheep. But his talk is very good and very interesting, very eye-opening. So that's a good one to look forward to. So why no-till and covers? I think we all kind of know the reason, or some of the main reasons, less soil erosion. And whether that be from wind or water, whatever that may be, but we know out here in West Texas, wind erosion is a big one. And you see this is a good picture here. It's a picture of my neighbor's, or it's a picture of my field with the rye planted in it, but my neighbor's field has ended up in my field. And I guess a lot of people would say, or I've heard, well, yeah, if I plant covers now, I've got all this soil on the edge of my field. Now what do I do with it? If I hadn't had cover there, then it just kept blowing. Maybe got on my neighbor's field with cover. Well, the answer isn't for me to stop planting cover. It's for my neighbor to start planting cover, I think is the answer. And so trying to help people that are doing that or expound the benefits of some of this so we can stop this moving around. Cost savings of what we've seen. We've seen on our operation about 60% less fuel usage and 60 to 70% less hours on equipment. It's allowed us to be able to stick around, to keep equipment around a lot longer than what we used to, where we're just not putting the hours on the maintenance. As I say, we've just been able to keep equipment around a lot longer. And as we all know, the water level's going one direction and equipment prices are going opposite direction. So that's really been nice. Employee burnout is the other one. It's a big one, I would say, that I didn't realize until we started doing some more no-till and covers. Before we were some of the first probably in our area to do covers and start doing no-till. And when everybody in your area is doing the same thing and everybody else is running a sand fighter and working 7 days a week and their crops getting blown out and they're replanting, then employees don't notice it as much. But when people start planting covers and not having to work every day of the week to keep a sand fighter going, employees start visiting about those things. And it really wasn't until a neighbor of mine, this really kind of hit home. He had all 7 employees quit on him in one day because they were going on about week 3 of working 7 days a week because their cotton crop was blown out. And they're blown out, so they're replanting, and his hands had just had enough. They could look across the road at my operation and they could visit with my hands and say, well, why haven't y'all run a sand fighter for the past 3 weekends in a row? And anybody in here who's run a sand fighter knows the sand doesn't blow on a Monday and a Tuesday. It blows on a Saturday and a Sunday is when the sand fighter is when it's dry enough to run. And so less employee burnout in this deal has been a big deal that you don't really notice till after you're in a little bit. And so, as I said before, talking about the parallels of equipment and prices, good quality employees to run this more expensive equipment we're buying, the number of people who are qualified to do that is going the same direction as the water in the Ogallala. They're as good today as they're ever going to get. Being able to find quality employees to do that. is about like, our water resource. And so being able to keep quality people around is of a big benefit, and just not having as much for them to do, or that we have to have for them to do. Water infiltration, I think we all kind of understand this and know this, but these are good illustrations of that. You can see there on the bottom and the top right, those are both pictures taken. This was in September of a couple years ago. Those two fields where the water's running off is my neighbors to the north. And where I've got the cover on the south, just after a 5-inch rain one day. And I don't imagine he was probably doing real good to keep about 20 to 30% of that on his field, and the rest of it ran into a lake. And I'm not saying we captured every bit of it, but we at least didn't have all the dirt work afterwards that he had to do. So, collecting unruly precipitation. As we know, the wind blows, and that sometimes is accompanied with snow. And so we're going to have anything kind of sticking up. Sure helps on big blowing snow days. Less evaporation and keeps the ground cooler. We know that. During the heat of the summer, running a pivot around or irrigating keeps from evaporating near as much. That can be a hindrance sometime when trying to germinate a cotton crop, but I believe, with the increased moisture retention that we're getting from not having this ground dry out so quick, that gives us a benefit, especially when trying to germinate a cotton crop. You may have to wait an extra week, something like that, let your soil warm up a little bit with covers, but I think that more than pays you back during the heat of the summer. And soil health benefits, less compaction, and firmer seed bed. Like I said, that sounds kind of goofy what I'm saying, but if you've ever planted behind a rod or a field cultivator when it's flat, we all know that ground's going to dry out to where that sweep or that rod ran. And trying to get cotton to imbibe enough moisture when you get a little couple of tenths shower and you're desperately hoping it's enough to try to get this cotton germinated and out of the ground. If I can get a couple tenths shower on a no-till field, I have a lot more confidence in being able to germinate that cotton crop or corn crop or whatever it is than if I've gone out there and plowed it ahead of time. And these are just some pictures of worms we found. Growing up, we never found any worms. And now on the farm, really, it's a good thing, but it's really kind of almost a nuisance when we're digging for cottonseed. We find more worms in a seed trench than we do cottonseed now. And I kind of feel bad having to push them out of the way. But, if we can find them in that small amount that we're digging seed up, it just makes me, it's just pretty amazing to think how many there are in an acre of land. And I know they're down there doing good, so. Our rotational sequence, and we'll go through it here. All of my stuff is cut in half, probably 95% of it. I have very little of my ground is, row crop back on row crop, where I've still got a little bit of water, but that's probably 3 to 4% of my total land. 95% of my ground is half and half, dry land and irrigated. So we start off right behind the combine or the cotton picker, and we're planting some sort of cereal. Rye is what we've been planting lately, and anywhere from 20 to 30, 40 pounds, depends on the later you get, try to bump that seeding rate up a little bit. We're not plowing. I think it's obviously it's important. When we used to run a field cultivator behind a cotton stripper. We thought we were cleaning some weeds up, but really what little moisture we had, we were just plowing out. And this is the first year, really, and since we've been doing no-tilling covers, we hadn't got a cereal crop established. Normally we get a little bit of rain in October during harvest, and I've always been able to establish a cereal crop where I'm not plowing ahead of the drill. And so stopping plowing ahead of the drill, I think made a big difference. And then if the rye or the, whatever cereal we have, if it gets up and we get enough rainfall, we'll harvest that, keep it for seed. If not, then we'll make that decision whether we want to go ahead and start planting covers in it, if the cover's weak, or wait, or what we're going to do with it. So then multi-species, is what we've been doing. And I'll kind of explain how we're migrating from that into more of, or just what the differences are that we've seen. And originally come up with this system of planting the rye. We know planting rye or a cereal behind cotton stalks or corn or whatever your summer crop is pretty popular. And more popular than that is then continuing to crop that the next year. Well, where we've cut stuff in half and we're letting it set fallow, my goal was to try to move my cover crop water usage as far away from my cotton crop as possible, is the purpose of it. And so I'm wanting either, when we plant a multi-species or a radish-based cover crop, we're liking that to to winter terminate or chemical terminate at some point in time. Generally around a frost date is when we'd like it to kill. So then we have all of the winter and the early spring to try to replenish some moisture. And that also in a year like this has been really evident. It also gives us an entire year to grow a cover. Because as I think we're about to find out this year, there's not much worse than having a flat, no-tilled ground and no cover growing on it. Because then you've kind of backed yourself into a corner on what you're going to do. Are you going to go out there and run a chisel plow and throw up a bunch of clods? If you got a small cotton crop, you're going to run a sand fighter a bunch. And so that's kind of how I come up with this. I didn't want to ever try to put myself in a position where I was forced to plow the ground again. And so that's why I'm following multi-species covers, following a cereal rise, kind of how we got to that. And the plan is this is where you'd work in some grazing too. I haven't ever been that good at working my grazing in, but anyway, this is where that would go. But I want to talk a little bit about the journey with these multi-species covers. And we started out, with more of a mix on the left, with about 10 or 15 different things in it. And I'm not saying that doesn't work or won't work good, but the things that I've learned, a lot of the mixes that are designed out here, especially if you're planting them early, I think it has its place. But this idea of multi-species covers and planting 10 or 15 things, and all you got to do is plant it and it'll be great and everything will be solved in your soil, just isn't the case, and that all cover crops are equal. When you plant that crop, the piece of land you planted on, how much rain there is, a multi-species cover will be different every day you plant it, every day of the year. And especially when you're planting this stuff early is what I found out. If you've had any kind of sorghum Sudan and millet in these mixes, and you plant that stuff in May and June, it's going to be millet and sorghum Sudan is what it's going to be. And you're going to have a couple of, dwarf Essex rape or something like that. You can find 10 or 15 of those in there. There's going to be no radish and there's going to be no turnips. There'll be some spindly sun hemp. I've never gotten any of mine to nodulate is the other reason. Maybe I'm kind of angry and bitter towards sun hemp, but I've never been able to get my legumes to nodulate very well. But anyway, my point in showing this is these are essentially the same mix you're looking at here on the left, or the pictures are. This last year I planted a little bit simpler mix just because the other things just essentially weren't growing. And so there wasn't point paying for a bunch of expensive brassicas. I actually did put some brassicas in the one on the right. They both had brassica like radish in them, but the one on the right was planted in August, September sometime this year. And you see the warm season grasses came up and grew, but didn't shade anything out like they did in that first picture, and didn't shade everything out. So I've got a lot more diverse cover on that picture on the right. And that's really what I'm trying to work towards, is what I'd ideally like to work towards in my rotation, is trying to work in a variety of roots and mainly some radish. My best cotton crops that I've had are following a radish crop, a good radish crop is what it's been. I've only been able to do that successfully once, and I've spent my time trying to recreate that and figuring out and learning from other folks that radishes hate shade and they don't like to be planted in June and July. You can plant them then, but don't go to try to water them up. You really want to be planted in about August is when the best radish crops I've ever had, and they don't want to be shaded over by a bunch of sorghum Sudan. Here's one of the radishes. This is the radish crop I lucked into and had a great cotton crop after it, and then kind of forgot about it and went to growing higher biomass crops, which I think can have a place, and we'll visit about them in a little bit. But you can see this monster radish we grew and how big it was. I got a video here if it'll play. And once those radishes, this is that same field, you can see a picture of when that radish deteriorated and leaves this massive hole for water infiltration when the pivot come around. And so I kept trying to figure out how I can get back to this. I think we'll run a spider and a beetle out here in a little bit. You can just imagine having a bunch of those across your field, and I really needed more radish in this picture than what I had. There's a picture of that one. I planted this crop in July sometime, but it was so dry it never come up. And I ended up running my pivot around the other side. I had cotton on the other side, and I was running my pivot around because it had turbines on it, and I didn't want to shut it off. But I was trying to pull the water off my cotton to get it to cut out. And so I just run my pivot around with my 80-inch drops, and you see that's where the milo come up. but it was enough to get the radish up everywhere. But the radish wasn't shaded out. I had a good time growing. This picture was taken like October after we'd had some rain and they went to grow, and I kind of really forgot about them, that they were out there. I watered them up once and just left them alone. I walked away and just focused on my cotton crop. Well, then I come out here in September and October and we got some rain and there's this gigantic radish crop, and I was wondering what all this is until I walked out there and saw these giant things. And so anyway, like I said, what I found best about radishes is they like to be planted in August or watered up in August, and they really dislike shade. So back to the bigger cover, or some of that larger cover we had, or where I think it has its place, or on some of this stuff is growing biomass on some ground. I've got some ground where we had so much rain this year. I have no rye cover. I've planted some rye on it, and I think trying to get some cover established quickly in the spring, it works really well, planting a sorghum suit in or something like that, but then maybe roll it down or terminate it and then think about planting a radish in it. And so I come up with this year. I'm sure a lot of people in here have probably already come up with this and thought about this, but it took me, 5 or 6 years running a stalk cutter over cover to come up with it. We had this Sam Stevens stalk cutter, and we used to have ripper shanks on the back when we were plowing everything, and I thought, as I was trying to lay some of this cover down, it was standing up, still in between the stalk cutters. I thought, man, it'd be nice if all that would lay down. So I was trying to get some of this stuff to break down was my goal. I was looking at fertilizer prices. Got this high carbon to nitrogen ratio cover crop on the ground. If I could lay this on the ground, get something to start working on it and breaking it down is what my goal was, what I was trying to do. And so I come up with this. I just put these stalk cutters on the back, and it worked really well. The first two are 24-inch, and the back ones are 16s I stuck on there. And the thing I like about it is if I decide I don't ever need a cover crop roller again, I didn't have to go spend $50,000 or $60,000 on a cover crop roller. And there's also not even a place I could lease one or a neighbor I could borrow one off of. And so I can always still use it as a stalk cutter. I was rolling this down, and this was right before this stuff started to head out. I was trying to get it before it headed out so I could lay it on the ground. Maybe this will play. And I've heard, and you would think, the roller crimpers, the chevron pattern's really important. And like I said, in a perfect world, I'd have a roller crimper, but I have a stalk cutter. When people say, well, it'll break loose, none of this is broken loose or blown off of the field. It didn't chop it up into small pieces to where it's all blowing away or windrowing. And maybe it's because I did it while it was still a little bit green. If you went and tried to do it now, it might be a little bit different story. But this all worked really well, getting all this stuff laid on the ground. Here's a slide I had in my talk a couple years ago about cover and how you can't have enough. And you can see the progression up there, starting in March to August and after harvest, and how quickly that cover crop broke down and went away. And that was my firm attitude until I got to this year and I figured out that I was wrong. And I say that a little facetiously. I'm joking a little bit about having too much cover because I still don't think that you can, but are you prepared to handle that amount of cover? Are you prepared to? And in this situation, the good Lord bailed me out because I wasn't prepared to handle this much cover. This started, and I'll show you in a little bit, it started with a massive rye crop, and then I planted sorghum Sudan into it and some other ones, and it was about a 4-inch mat of trash when I went to plant cotton in it in this May. And if y'all remember, May was extremely dry, or this entire last year was very dry, until about the middle of May. It was for us. And I knew this one was going to be a bear to plant, and so I planted it first because it was dry, and I knew I could run my trash fingers on my Yitter trash movers. I could set them all the way down on the depth band. And I knew if I got any rain, it was just going to make a mud hole if I tried to do that. And I also knew that cotton didn't want to come up through 4 inches of trash. If it's a corn crop, maybe so, wouldn't have been so bad. But I was planting cotton. And so, anyway, I fell into that day when it was really dry and pushed all that stuff out of the way, was able to run my fingers all the way down and get a crop up. But I got really lucky on that one, that I was able to get up, and it started raining that evening after I got it planted. And so, like I said, the good Lord bailed me out of that one on a couple of farms where I had a lot of trash. And looking back on it now, I know what I could have done different or what I would have changed. Let me see if this will change. This is what that picture started that field started out like. And you see my dad, he was back there making sure we were doing things right on the drill. This rye crop, none of this was irrigated. This was all just what it grew. And it actually happened out, this was the second year we had a great rye crop. You can see how tall the rye is on my pickup there. There were spots that rye was 6 foot tall, and that was like 20 to 30 pounds of rye. And I kept thinking, well, somebody's going to want some seed, or I can cut it, or I can monetize this somehow, was kind of my thought. Or at the end, I got desperate and thought I could bale it, or graze it. Well, all of those guys backed out and couldn't find anybody to do it. And looking back on it now with this much cover, I probably would have just left it there, used my roller on it, and then planted radishes in it is what I would have done. But I did not do that. I went ahead and planted more cover in it. And you can see, planting a lot of this rye trash. And also, you don't have to have a real fancy drill to get through here. I'd really like to have a single disc drill, but a box drill will plant through a lot of trash, if you don't think that it will. But that's beside the point. Anyway, my point is, looking back, I would have changed this now, but planted a multi-species cover into this, and this idea of being, also this more and more cover, more and more cover. And it's good, but it kind of gets to a point too, as you figure out a bunch of high carbon to nitrogen ratio plants, and you start building some of this stuff up on top of the ground. It's kind of where I'm at on a few of these. And so I say all this to say, you got to kind of know what your goal is with all of these covers. This situation here, I'd been much better off just stopping and waiting and leaving my rye crop out there and planting radishes or something into it and rolling it down. But I planted another one into it. And I think the heavy cover can have its place if you're starting out with a bare field. But in this field, I wasn't starting out with a bare field. And so it ended up working out, but I still think I'm possibly hurt my yield with having so much trash on the ground that's not breaking down as quick as what I'd like it to. So you got to know if you're, I would say, looking at all this, you're going to cover for biomass or for roots. Do you have cover on the ground already, something to hold the ground together? Then I'd encourage you to look at maybe growing something for roots, a diversity of roots, some radishes, something like that. What's your subsequent crop going to be? It's a lot easier to plant corn into this trash than it is plant cotton into it. And so what's your goal, or is your goal grazing? And timeliness of planting and termination are very important. I don't think can't be afraid to pull the plug on a cover crop, I guess is what I'm saying. If you need to roll it down or terminate it, so that you don't harm your subsequent crop. That trying to be this perfect no-tiller of always letting this big cover grow and do all of this, there's no award for that. You just shooting yourself in the foot. So 80-inch cotton, I'm going to attempt to talk about this and tell you what my experience is. Everybody at this table I sit at over here is more of an 80-inch cotton expert than I am, and so I feel a little foolish speaking about it. So if there's any questions, you can direct them to this table over here. But I'll let you know what my experience is on 80-inch cotton this year. On my farm, we've done it so far on our dry land and our marginally irrigated acres, and I really, really like wide row cotton on our marginally irrigated acres. And I really think that's also the easiest spot for a guy to get started with it. I know insurance and landowner relationships can make, especially dry land, difficult with wide row, because insurance is a lot of people's first concern, and you're cutting that in half. On a marginally irrigated farm, you can, just about guarantee you're going to at least get a crop up. Dry land you may get off of or not have to live with it, but a marginally irrigated farm, you can get it up. And a marginally irrigated farm, wide row cotton just does phenomenally. On low water. That's where this stuff shines. And so we'll go through the pros and cons. We know, or most people know, the first thing people want to know about is decreased seed cost. Yeah, the seed population is much less, and I'm still planting too much. We need to be planting, you can automatically pretty much just cut it in half to begin with. A larger rooting zone is something you don't realize or think about till you kind of get started. I've got a pivot that's got 125 gallons a minute, just a big humidifier basically, on a quarter section. That's the lowest Synerger will let me nozzle it at. It'll be just all fours. It's already the inside 4 towers are all fours right now, and so I can't go any lower. But that farm, I plant half of it every year in cotton, and I was doing 40-inch cotton before I started doing wide row cotton. And it got to the point where essentially this farm, this 120-acre pivot, needed to be 30 acres of cotton is what it needed to be. That's what I had water for. Well, when you start thinking about 80-inch cotton or wide row cotton, the best way to put it or, think about it is instead of planting 30 acres of cotton on that farm, now I can plant 60 acres or 60 land acres, but plant it in wide row cotton. Now I've got cotton out there. It's the same amount of seed I would have had on 40s on the quarter, but I'm capturing twice the amount of rainfall that I was before. I'm capturing twice the amount of sunlight that I was before because I'm going to double the land area. And I've got twice the rooting zone that I had before. I think it's the best way to sum it up or think about wide row and why it's such a more efficient plant. Also gives you the opportunity to seed some of your covers earlier, whether that's spreading them out there earlier, with like a whirlybird deal or rigging up an inner row cedar, where you're getting so much more sunlight down in there, you can just get started so much better. Less disease pressure. I know from experience visiting with the group of guys that we visit with that they're doing a bunch of this. I know this isn't our issue here, but I know boll rot can be much less of an issue where you can get sunlight and air down in that canopy. But for us, I know I've seen on my own stuff is less vert pressure. We're kind of the same thing where we're not keeping that ground so wet and so saturated all the time. And it also allows you to get away with a lot less nitrogen so that you're not flaring up vert and, doing that. Some of the drawbacks to it or the initial thoughts of, is crop insurance. That's always a big deal with landowners. At some point we got to decide, are we going to try to produce a crop or, are we trying to make our insurance guy happy, and I understand we got to have insurance as a safety net. I understand, don't get me wrong, or it's good to have as a safety net, but, we can't, I've tried to get in the habit of you can't outguess your program or change your program because we know year in and year out what this country's going to be, and that's a semi-arid environment, and so we got to try to plan on that. And every time I've tried to plan on or think I'm going to outsmart an insurance crop or think, well, this year's going to be dry and I'm going to do this and this is going to work, I've never had that work out. I've always had the best luck when I actually try to produce something. That's our jobs as producers, is to produce something. And so 80s and wide row cotton allow me to do that on a much more consistent basis, I would say, than I have been with my 40s. Increased management from a PGR standpoint. Especially with a marginally irrigated or any kind of irrigated wide row cotton. You've got to stand on this stuff with picks a lot of times, and I mean pixing it early. And I'm still not pixing it early enough, as I've been told. But I started on this stuff when it was at 6 leaves this year, and I was told I can still go earlier. But all of this cotton, all of my wide row cotton, I don't think was no taller than waist high on me this year, and I don't think I heard any of it. Now, we had good rain, but I think early PGRs and often PGR applications are the key to fruit retention on this, or I know they are. And that's where your extra yield comes from on this is more fruiting positions. Equipment adjustments, hooded spray rigs. You can see here, this field here on this picture here is a drip field, and it's cotton on cotton, and had to make some adjustments to my hooded rig to try to clean up middles, things like that. A hooded rig is pretty important piece of equipment, I would say, to have on wide rows. I wouldn't say we had any more weed pressure, but it's mainly if you have any kind of volunteer control is the biggest. This is a picture of my 80-inch dry land that I had this year. And this is a field where I had really weak cover to start with, and I'll show a picture of that. But this field was kind of two halves. One half had really weak cover on it, and the other side had a little bit better cover. But one side got hailed on. But these 80s ended up doing about 750, 800 pounds to the land acre this year is what they ended up doing. And that's another thing to mention. I will mention on wide row that I forgot to. This is about our 4th or 5th year doing wide row cotton. And all the years I've been doing it, I'm not the best wide row cotton farmer, but I've never had my wide row cotton compared to my 40-inch check. It's never made less than my 40s. It's always at least made the same or more. And so being scared of growing it because you don't think it's going to make what it's going to make, is not a concern. Or I've never realized it on my own operation. This is that same field. You can see I had a little bit of cover, and we had a lot of rain this year. We probably had, 35, 36 inches of rain. It rained all the time. It just kept raining. And once it quit in September, it quit. But we had good rain through the year. Like I said, if the north half of this picture had just a little bit of better cover on it, wasn't great, and the south half had hardly any cover on it. And the south half made 500 pounds, and the north half made a little over 1,000. If that whole field had that same amount of cover on it, I think we could have averaged over 2 bales on this 80-inch dry land without a problem. But the half with no cover on it, I don't think we realize how much we're hurting ourselves with it, a little bit of cover. I got a slight peck and hail on one part of it too that already had no cover, so that didn't help it. But I think it just goes to show you the potential, when this stuff is done correctly or more correctly than what I did here, is having good cover on the ground and doing these 80s, what the potential of some of this stuff is. And you can see it just about to the exact spot where the cotton gets better and where it was sorrier. My irrigated 80s, I showed you all that picture earlier. This was on some low water drip. It was like 2 3/4 gallon minute drip. Ended up doing 1,540 pounds to the land acre. So I was very pleased with that. And I think there's guys who are doing it and doing even better with that. But I was really pleased with this farm. That's the most cotton this farm has made in a while. But this one here also, it had a lot of picks on it. And so, but PGR is cheap, and we're generally going across it anyway. And that was the thing about insurance. I guess I'll say I probably know that, but when you talk about wide row cotton, and if you make, like this one, say you made a little over 1,500 pounds, if you can do that for a few years, it starts to help your APH on your insurance. We got to turn in like 3,100 pounds is what we turned in for insurance for this one to the APH this year. And so we can do that for a few years. You can afford to take a hit on your insurance that's half or something like that if we can build yields up, especially on some of these marginally irrigated farms. What our planter looks like, it's really pretty simple, and I just kind of wanted to emphasize, excuse me. I was listening to a guy the other day, and he made the comment that he was talking to another farmer, said that he was too old to change and didn't want to have to buy a bunch of equipment and make a bunch of changes. He thought no-till was good and covers were good, but he just couldn't make all these changes. And I understand from an age standpoint, if a guy's a couple years out from retirement, maybe not making any big drastic changes. But this idea that equipment has to change so dramatically, I think, is a fallacy. As y'all saw what my drill looked like, it's a pretty simple box drill. And before we had that drag type, it was just a 3-point box drill. And we have that in a spray rig, and we've made a few changes to our planters, about it. And really, I think the trash movers on the front is what gets used the least. The most important piece of equipment on this planter is those spiked closing wheels on the back of it, just so that it keeps processing the trash. That's it. And I think you could plant 90% of what I got. And that's even some pretty heavy trash and cover, except for that one gnarly picture I showed y'all earlier where I really needed those fingers in the front to help. We don't use the trash fingers very much in the front. And so my point in saying all that is it doesn't take a lot of crazy modifications or crazy expensive. You can buy and upgrade as much as you want. But to get started with some of this stuff, it's a pretty low barrier to entry, I guess is my point with all of this. The 80-inch setup, we usually, when we're doing 80s, sometimes we're coming off of 40s, or it may change. We don't know what we're doing. So usually every box is full. And so it's pretty easy. We'll just pull the hose off the bottom of the vacuum hose off the bottom of the disc below the box and close the baffles. And we don't ever have any problems with planting or dropping some seed. And I can't remember, I always have to call and ask Patrick every year on shifting the bubble if I shift it to my empty box side or my full box side. I think it's maybe to the empty box side, but anyway, on the Trimble, you just shift it half your row width. You shift 20 inches. Because if you're setting up your planter, you're going to have one end's going to be a full box, one end's going to be an empty box. And the best advice I could say if you're doing any 80s is I always have to test my planter out on the end of the field before I get started. Because your empty box on the end, your dead box, when you plant solid, will double back on itself. And then when you turn towards the direction of your full box, it will then skip 80 inches. I don't know how it works in the GPS. It doesn't make any sense in my mind why it should work, but it just does. And I was just doing what I was told on setting it up. So anyway, sometimes I have to remember which way to shift or practice on the turn row before I go to the field. And then once you get it set, you just plant solid. Don't go to skipping. Just plant solid across the field and your pattern will stay the same. That's just a picture of a planter running. And you can see there, we're not hardly even moving any trash there. We're just planting straight into it. And this is the last one I want to close on. This is kind of my own deal of thinking about this and what comes up a lot when visiting about, especially cutting stuff in half and then even cutting it in half again if you're talking about wide row farming. Is having a good relationship with your landowners and having a risk-sharing relationship. And I just encourage all of us, whether we're landowners in this room or we're operators, is getting out of this mindset of landlord. There's one Lord in my life, and that's my Savior, Jesus Christ. And it's not a landlord, and we're not in a feudal system in England, or Europe, to where we live and these people give us the right to live and farm here. It should be a relationship is my point. And I think we got to change our thinking and our language. And that starts with a mindset. And I think the biggest way to do that is with communication. I was recently at a no-till conference in Wichita, and there's some guys that were asking about, well, how do we get started on some of this? How do you visit with landowners about some of this stuff? And there was a lot of things that were thrown around, but the main thing that wasn't thrown around is just go visit and talk with them. I think was the biggest thing. There was a lot of other things of gifts or visiting with kids and get them on your side, or maybe they'll see the results after a while. Well, yeah, I'm sure they'll see the results after a while, but it's that initial year getting them to do it and not kick you off, is part of the deal. And so I think just number one, you got to believe in it yourself as an operator. And number two, going and visiting it with them. We sit down and visit with all of them, and they're not saying it doesn't take some work, but if you can explain this to landowners, I've never had one that wasn't excited about it by the time we got done. The ones that are a little bit more absentee or younger know about this stuff and have heard about it and are excited about it. When you were talking about regen and some of this stuff, they're all about it. And some of the older ones generally grew up on the farm and had livestock, and this is not strange to them either. I told one of my landladies that I was going to put cows on her farm, and she just fell all over herself because her dad used to have cows on that farm. And I never knew that until I went and visited with her about all of this. And I thought this was going to kind of be a battle, but it ended up being, she just talked about the old days. And she's like, oh yeah, whatever you do, that sounds wonderful. Sounds like you know what's going on. But if I didn't have that communication, that visit with her, she may have come out and saw that and thought, well, how come nobody talked to me about this? And so as farmers, I'm guilty of this too, but it's about telling our story to the public, but it's also communicating what we're doing, telling our story to the people we farm with and work with. Because 75% of the land that I farm is not our own land, it's rented land. And so anyway, that's just something I'd like to finish with. And anybody's got any questions, be happy to answer them. I don't know how I did on time, I wasn't really paying attention.
We've got a few minutes for some questions. We'll start.
Got a question?
Yeah.
So on the multi-species covers, we talked about the radishes and some of the other tubers. In that rotation with cotton, when are you planting that cover? And are you finding that you're getting good germination early to overwinter with those species? Or you find that oftentimes radishes and such are coming out at the same time you're germinating cotton?
Well, the multi-species, the way my order goes is once I harvest a cotton crop or whatever that crop is, I'm immediately planting a cereal into those standing cotton stalks. That overwinters into the next spring, and I either harvest it or don't, and then we're planting multi-species covers. And depending on the year of that field, how badly I need cover, if I need cover really bad, I may start planting in May and June to try to keep the ground from blowing. But if I've grown any kind of rye crop or cereal crop and have enough cover in the ground, then I generally tend to like to wait towards August and plant something that's mainly, or just plant radishes by itself. You can plant radishes in a cereal if you want some more cereal on the ground, or some green cereals growing. But the radishes want to be planted, is when in August is when they want to be planted. Is when I'm planting those ahead of, and then they'll just hang out all winter long until the next cotton crop or corn, whatever the next cash crop is. I don't know if that.
My question is heavy residue, do you have any trouble harvesting just so that it's collecting in row units and stacking up, and if so, how do you do it?
Sure, I don't know if anybody heard, you ask if the trash gives me any problems when we harvest. It can. It hadn't so far. Rarely you'll have an issue. I have a cotton picker that we run, so that helps process some trash, but also have a lot of acres that are custom stripped every year. And so we run both type of equipment over it. This one here, you know, and when we start this field here, if I know I'm going to have some heavy trash, I always like to at least, even before I come with my roller, at least run a stalk cutter over it to at least put that stuff on the ground, so I don't have a lot of hay grazer stalks sticking up in my cotton row, you know, all year long and having to fight with that. You'll still have some that stick up a little bit, but so far it really hadn't been an issue. Every now, you know, once or twice a year, I may have to get out and it plugs up on the pressure plate, you know, of that picker. But really, for the most part, I haven't had any big issues. But I think if I'm going to have a bunch sticking up, I will try to run a stalk cutter ahead of the cotton planter, just try to lay it on the ground.
All right, yeah, there we go. Okay, we have a question over here.
On this rye you're planting, is that a perennial or annual?
On the rye, that's an annual.
Okay, I'm looking for a cool season perennial for grazing purposes.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure I'd be much help.
Go ahead.
Yeah, what are you doing on, say, marginal irrigated ground right now that doesn't have any cover on it? What's your plan on that, or dry land?
Dry land and marginally irrigated, you know, I was able to grow some cover last year. You know, either had the radish and the cereal cover on it, or it had some hay grazer cover it like I was rolling down. And so the stuff I'm going into this next year, I have really good cover on, where I'm going to be planting cotton into this next spring. And all that marginally irrigated dry land ground, you know, will be wide row 80-inch cotton is what it'll be. And then I'm going to try to spend this summer where my cotton was this year, trying to grow some more cover for next year is my plan. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
On where you're doing this on a pivot, are you putting this in a circle, or are you going in straight rows? Everything I'm seeing here is straight rows, but it's all drip on dry land.
Yeah, straight. This is a better question for some of these guys. I know the straight rows I think probably would do better on north-south rows, but I did it a few years and it was just so rough going across pivot tracks was the hard part. So all of my stuff is in a circle. It still is in a circle.
Okay, are you running a bubbler, and are you doing this right on the bubbler,
Sure.
or are you trying to split the row, or I'm just trying to figure out where you're running your water?
I've found if you're going to do it in a circle on a pivot, I still like to stay in top of, you just got to pick one of your old rows is what it is. Because you get to think, my stuff's on 80-inch drops, LIPA drops is what it is. In an ideal world, maybe you'd have that drop right between both cotton rows, but that also means you're planting in an old hard row is what that means. And I accidentally did that on one of my farms this year, and it was pretty sorry 80-inch cotton because I was planting into basically what were all bullwheel rows is what I was planting into. And so I found what is the best is, and if you plant, you know, pivot, if you're planting in the middle of the soft row, then your drop drags through it all year long. And I didn't think that wasn't wild about that, turning my cutoffs on and off. And so you just pick a top of a bed if you want to plant in a circle is what I'm doing. And you can alternate, you know, the next year, the other year, but just that puts your drop 20 inches off to the side of your cotton row is what it does when you plant in a circle, but just stay on top of the old beds.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Well, and I don't know, it may not be a good question, but so is there anything that you did or plan to do or could do to kind of overcome the amount of trash that was left, like to get your carbon to nitrogen ratio back in balance, help speed up the breakdown process of all of that so that you start to see those benefits?
I think first thing you probably, you know, spraying some molasses on this I think would probably help, maybe speed up some micro breakdown, possibly some AMS, you know, something like that to help speed it up. If I had to go back in time, I would just not plant my cover crop, but I know that's not really an option. But on this, probably spraying some molasses on it. It's going to be my next step on some of my real heavy cover.
Thank you.
All right, we have a few more minutes.
Sure. Like I said, having a good variety is very important. I mean, all the time, but especially when you're planting into some of these really heavy covers. You know, may have to delay planting. You know, you may not be the first one to the field. that there's no doubt that it can give you some issues with cooler temperature, especially when it's really heavy. Most of my stuff isn't super heavy like that, but when you have some heavier, trash and it cools it off, it can definitely be an issue. I think the cover can help you overcome some of that, even if you're delayed by, a week or 10 days planting, maybe than what you want to be. Just like that field I showed earlier where I had some trash or decent trash and no trash. The part where I had no trash, they both come up fine, but the one with no trash on it, I think this stuff takes more of a beating from small winds than what we realize. And so I think even though we have a little bit cooler temperatures, having planted in that cover, that cotton is doing better early on. And I think can help overcome, maybe being planted a little bit later even if that's what we have to end up doing. But having cooler temperatures on some of this heavy trash can be a potential issue, but really the first thing to try to avoid with that, I think, is just trying to find good seed, larger seeded varieties, and make sure the cool germ is good on these things. Oh, tarp it to help promote the breakdown? Yes, sir. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you on dry land as our water, declines, it's more important. And you had that one picture that there wasn't as much cover on some as there was on others. Is there anything you do to help on dry land? I mean, to help, in a year like this, it's impossible. But what do you see as a way to get some covers on some dry land to help make that work?
Well, that's kind of how we started, just lay it out for a year to begin with. Is really it, because as we know out here, rain during a certain time of the year is not guaranteed, and where we have a year to grow a cover crop, we can essentially get cover or enough rain during that time of year to do that. And that was mainly geared towards, everything we're doing is geared towards limited water, and mainly our dry land acres is what we're trying to make work. Because if it doesn't work on dry land, it's not going to work, because we know irrigation is not our long-term future. And so that's the whole reason we have this year set out, is just to try to make sure we have enough time to, whether it's a fall cereal crop or a warm season, grass crop or a radish dominated crop is the reason we're doing that, so we have enough time to guarantee us enough time to grow a crop.
Anything else? This is a good opportunity. All right, well, Kris, thanks so much. Excellent presentation. I really think the point, of irrigation is not our future. We do the best we can with it and stretch it out the longest that we can, but we know what the inevitable is, and we've got to figure out how to farm it. And Dwight mentioned earlier, when you're drought all the time, maybe it's not a drought, maybe it's just what we are. But what I'm inspired about is we've got the technology. We're getting the knowledge how we can grow and make it work in this. And I was really inspired by those pictures out of India and what they could do in a harsher environments, a lot harsher than ours.